Howdy ho gamers, how's it poppin', and welcome back to Trails in the Sky first chapter discussion time. Thank you again to GungHo Entertainment for providing me a review code for the game, and once again keep in mind, all of the videos on this channel discussing individual chapters of Trails in the Sky first chapter are designed to be watched by people who have already played the original version of the game and the original second chapter. So if you're looking to get into the series with this game or just haven't played Sky in the first place, don't watch this. You can watch my demo impressions on my main channel, as well as a full complete review of the entire game, which I'll do once I'm done with all of these chapters. All the gameplay you see in this video was recorded with the prologue demo, so it is not the chapter I'm talking about, so there's no real need to stay glued to the video player. Feel free to tab out and just listen. Didn't mention it last time, the names of the chapters have also been retranslated along with all the dialogue relocalization, and that's not a problem in most cases. Chapter 3 is still called The Black Orbment. I genuinely don't think there was any other way to translate the Japanese name anyway. The prologue is A Father's Departure instead of A Father's Love, A New Beginning. Chapter 1 is The Vanished Airliner instead of Disappearance of the Lind. Chapter 3 is the same, and the final chapter appears to be called Turmoil in the Capital instead of Turmoil in the Royal City. None of those are any big deal. My only minor complaint is that Chapter 2, and therefore the thing it was named after, is Madrigal of the White Flower instead of Madrigal of the White Magnolia. Obviously, this isn't anything remotely resembling a mistranslation, and I don't think the name has shown up yet in the rest of the series, but I just subjectively think White Magnolia sounds a little bit better and more poetic as the title of a historical fiction play, and the name is said enough in voice dialogue throughout the chapter for me to go, that's not what I remember it being called, just enough times to make me think that I do prefer the original name, though it is in a lot of voice dialogue, so it might have been changed to eliminate an extra syllable from the name for timing reasons in cutscenes. The epithet of the character Estelle plays has been changed from Ruby Knight Julius in the original to Crimson Knight Julius in the remake, which is really, really funny, only because there's an active voice line where Estelle gets the name of the character wrong and she says Ruby Knight in what would have been accurate for the original game but is inaccurate for the remake. The only reason I'm bringing any sort of big attention to this at all is because this play seems like the kind of thing that would eventually become relevant to the overall plot of the series at some point down the line. Keep in mind, it has not yet to the best of my knowledge. So this is the kind of thing that might eventually cause continuity errors, but as of now, there's no actual problem with any of the new names here. If I was the one responsible for giving Julius a new epithet, I probably would have called him the Vermilion Knight instead of the Crimson Knight, though, purely because having characters named the Vermilion and Azure Knights would be fun foreshadowing for Cold Steel, even though that's definitely not the intention in the original script. As for the rest of the localization, it continues the trajectory of Chapter 1 as being pretty good. I wouldn't say up to par with the original Xseed script, but definitely better than what was shown off in the prologue demo. Every character important enough to have voice dialogue maintains their original name, and I only noticed a handful of NPCs who had different ones, with only the Genis Royal Academy teacher Mr. Effort being renamed to Mr. Elford in the remake standing out as something that's wrong in any way. Most new proper nouns, equipment, and item names are the same, though there are a couple that stand out as questionable to me. Almost every quartz and accessory that shows up outside the Sky Arc maintains their pre-existing name, but for whatever reason the Gladiator headband is renamed to Victory headband, and considering you can get two of them and then also upgrade them with U materials in the same chapter, it does stand out a bit. The road in between Minoria Village and the city of Ruan has had its name changed to Gull Seaside Way, matching the original games, when it was called Maeve Seaside Way on the map of Liberl in the demo. This is especially significant because it's named Gull Seaside Way not just in text, but also in voiced lines, which explicitly proves that the demo was using a completely different localization build than the final game will use. On the other hand, the road south of Ruan leading to the Airletin checkpoint has not been changed to Orion Causeway, matching the original games. It keeps its name from the demo of Aina Causeway, though there's a very good reason for it. An active voice conversation plays where Estelle is reminded of Aina, the Roland Bracer Guild receptionist, by the name of the Aina Causeway, so their choices were either keep the name or completely write a new active voice conversation from scratch instead of just translating the one that already existed. Collins is referred to as the headmaster and not the dean of the Royal Academy in this version, which doesn't really bother me that much. I don't think he's referred to enough outside the Sky Arc for this to really break continuity in any way, and honestly, given the type of school Genis is, I think headmaster as a title does make a bit more sense than dean, even if almost everything else is purely based on American English instead of British. Before we move on to everything else, one last thing about localization. I think some people need to let go the idea that they're going to change the names of the towers to match the original. They kept the name Tetracyclic Towers for all of them as a group. That's the only thing that's relevant to the rest of the series outside the Sky Arc. That's the only thing that needs to be consistent. And also, Falcom themselves appear to have changed their official stance on the romanization of the names of all 4 towers. Road signs in the original games did not have text actually printed on them, but there is English text on most of them in the remake. And for every single tower, the sign pointing to them has the name used in the new GungHo localization. And as far as I can tell, GungHo did not have the ability to edit in-game textures to that degree like Nisa has done sometimes with their name changes. So they are using what Falcom is saying. I know there's an old Japanese liberal map that gives the romanizations of the towers using names very close to what Exceed used for their localizations, but I think Falcom themselves has changed their mind on what these things are called. And that's because the gems known as Esmelis, Amberl, and Saphiril do exist in the Japanese script even of the original game. As far as I can tell, the names are usually written out in kanji, but the first time the name of each shows up, it's given a furigana pronunciation that is Esmelas, Amberl, Saphiril, etc. in katakana, and Exceed just used that katakana pronunciation for every time those gems show up in the English script, and that is consistent in the GungHo localization. The gem Estelle and Joshua bring from the Malga mine to Klaus is called an Esmelis crystal in the original Japanese as well as both localizations. The thing is, the Japanese names of the towers are also in kanji, and the kanji used in those tower names are different from the kanji used in the names of the gems, so I'm thinking that Falcom chose to give different English names for the towers to reflect the fact that their Japanese names are different Japanese names from the gems. And honestly, yeah, I get it, they're both green, but the Esmelis Tower, called Jade Tower in the new localization, is not made out of Esmelis crystals, so it doesn't make perfect sense to call it that in the first place to me. To hammer this home, the House Dalmor relic that gets stolen by Phantom Thief B during that one side quest has had its name changed. In the original, it was the Sapphire Glim, but in the remake, it is called the Saphiral Torch. So clearly the names of those gems still exist in the new script, they're just not applied to the towers, to which they were not completely applied in the original Japanese in the first place. Alright, let's talk about the rest of the chapter. Unlike last chapter, which had 3 new side quests, there weren't any in chapter 2, which has me wondering how much new stuff there's going to be at all. Like, will there be anything new in chapter 3? Maybe a couple more quests where you have Zin around. And then in the finale, I could see that being where a lot of side quests are added. Maybe they let you into the Erebonian and Calvardian embassies early or something like that. And there could be a lot more foreshadowing there. But if it really is just a couple new side quests to balance out chapter 1 and make it as long and as content rich as the other chapters, I don't really know how I feel about the choice to add only that much stuff to the game. I have been consistently impressed by how often the game goes into cinematic cutscene mode, for lack of a better term. Most recent Trails games have 2 tiers of cutscene quality, but this one kind of has 3. There's the regular talking heads and full text box with character name on the bottom of the screen cutscene that obviously comprises most cutscene dialogue in the entire game, and that's completely expected for this series. Then there's the pseudo pre-rendered looking scenes that are reserved for big moments in the story, like important events and the beginning and end of chapters, that up the quality of the lighting and shaders, play in real time with no text boxes, and usually have some motion capture involved. In between that though, there are short snippets of more actiony cutscenes that have real-time playing, subtitles, and no text boxes, but don't change the lighting and don't go as hard with the animation, but are still a major step up in quality from just watching characters do canned animations at each other. And the game slips into that really frequently and without loading screens in between those and normal text box cutscenes, especially in this chapter. Like, I wasn't expecting a 15-second snippet of higher animation quality out of nowhere just for Agate cutting one wolf in half in the battle at Crone Pass checkpoint, but it's there, it's cool, and it happens pretty frequently, even for minor character introductions. On the flip side, we are still cursed with the Falcom moment of not having the protagonist voice acted in a cutscene where other people are, and because that applies to both Estelle and Joshua in this game, I think it's even worse than in the Cold Steel and Daybreak games that do this. The voice acting itself is of the same standard of quality as the rest of the games so far, and I have to give special shoutouts to Jill's VA for sounding exactly as I would expect that character to, as well as the characters playing the unnamed girl students who are playing men in the production of Magical of the White Flower, Because while Estelle, Joshua, and Chloe do all use different voices when they're playing characters of the opposite gender, it's relatively subtle. And the two guys playing Princess Joshua's maids don't really sound like they're doing a voice at all, while the performances of the characters of Radmont and Claude actively sound like a teenage girl trying to sound like an adult man. Kind of voice actor related and more me personally being weird, Clem sounds like a VTuber to me. Like, not any specific individual person, the cadence of his voice just reminds me of VTubers for whatever weird reason, even though the voice itself does sound exactly like I would expect it to. I might be weird. We don't get a lot of Julia in the chapter, but I'm excited to hear what her battle dialogue sounds like, and also actual direct interactions with Amalthea, because their rivalry is really entertaining to me. Richard is still in nice guy mode, and honestly, I think his performance pulls it off better than Weissman in the guise of Professor Alba does, so I'm really interested in hearing what he sounds like once he goes mask off. Speaking of masks, though, we do get a little bit more of Travis Willingham as Louvet here, and how did they get him back? Like, I'm happy he's here, and his performance so far has been great, but I think he had a single-digit number of lines in the original games, and other characters who haven't been voiced since Sky and only had that many lines, like Richard and Julia, have been recast. They absolutely did the Agate and Louvet clone battle justice, by the way. They more or less recreated the entire choreography from the sprite-based version in the original game, and mocapped most of it, so all the cool stuff is still there. Louvet does still stand on Agate's sword and jump off of it, as well as bounce off the guidepost. It's cool. I'm very excited to see the more elaborate duels in SC, if they're all going to be this quality. Like, if Agate having a small scuffle with a clone of Louvet, who's way above his level, is this good, what's Zin versus Walter and Joshua versus Louvet in second chapter going to be like? I'm actually kind of interested if they're going to stick with Louvet for the pronunciation of that character's name, or go with something closer to the Japanese or the German word it's supposed to be. I think they're probably going to end up with Louvet, because I'm fairly certain they have not started recording dub dialogue for the SC remake. The SC remake might be a 2027 thing, it might not even be coming out next year. And from what I can tell, GungHo is extremely cognizant of people pointing out localization inconsistencies so far, so even if they're not immediately patched into this game, it's very, very likely SC is going to stick much closer to established terminology, and when they're recording voice lines for that, there's a good chance they'll record fixed voice lines for things in this game. So while I am curious to see what pronunciation they go for in this game, if his name is ever said in the first chapter, I don't actually remember, but it's gonna be Louvet in SC almost certainly. It's not wrong in any way, but I was surprised that they pronounced the last name of the mayor of Rouen Dalmor instead of Dalmor. It is an objectively correct pronunciation of that name, and I think more accurate to the Japanese. It's just not how I read it in my head. It's also really funny. He does not mention his first name at all in this version, so the only time he's referred to as Maurice Dalmor is when Julia places him under arrest, which is really funny, though I think there is some NPC dialogue earlier in the chapter that calls him that. And I completely forgot that you don't learn Gilbert's last name in this game at all, so that's neat. That cutscene was also one that was done really well, the boat chase and the Arcee showing up. Estelle deflecting the bullets with her staff was really, really cool even in the original, but there she was just doing her regular staff spinning animation and the bullets bounced off of that like she was just putting up a shield. But in this version, we see her actively swing bullets out of the air with individual strikes, and I think Joshua blocks one from Chloe too, which is so much cooler. And yes, the ship is pronounced Arcee consistently in the dub. I seem to remember at least one Cold Steel game erroneously pronouncing it Arsail, but it is Arcee here, which is obviously more correct based on the language it's derived from and consistent with most of the rest of the series at least. That should be it for story, so let's talk gameplay stuff. This chapter is really where the rebalancing to make crafts as viable as arts were in the original really started to hit, as even off the rip, Agate is pretty good in this version. Wild Rage barely does any damage to him and it gives him 60 CP, and like I said before, you can get 2 Gladiator headbands that can be upgraded to increase CP gain by 60% apiece. That doesn't stack with Wild Rage, but he also has a support skill where he'll sometimes increase his own strength and give himself CP regen, morale gives CP regen, and overall, the craft economy is so much better that it's pretty easy to get him in perpetual S-craft state. That's another thing. Characters' crafts have been changed around in this version, and I don't just mean altering their effects to fit the new battle system or changing the levels they're gotten. By the way, both Estelle and Joshua have their second S-crafts by the end of this chapter easily, but also in the crafts characters have and the order they're learned. Case in point, Beatdown is nowhere to be seen, although I believe it has been downgraded to a regular craft that Agate will learn later on in the game. Agate's S-craft starts at Final Break, and that's a little unusual to me. As far as I can tell, Estelle and Joshua are the only characters to even get a second S-craft in this game, and it seems like everyone except them is only going to have 2 of them by the end of second chapter. I don't really know how to feel about this because it doesn't exactly make S-craft spam less powerful than it already was, but it seems to go along with Daybreak's deal, where it took until the second game for the protagonist of that arc to get his second S-craft, and only a handful of characters getting a second one in the third game of the arc. I'm not the biggest fan of that change. I'd rather characters have at least 2 S-crafts apiece, and it shows their progression throughout their character arc as they gain more powerful ultimate attacks. But at this rate, it does seem like S-crafts that are new in second chapter will still be learned at some point during that game. Honestly, based on the menu layout, I'm not entirely sure if the Daybreak engine even supports characters having more than 2 S-crafts in the first place, so that genuinely might be why they made that change. And Estelle and Joshua are only going to have Barrage and Black Fang at the start of SC, and then learn Wheel of Time and Phantom Raid later on. On the topic of S-crafts, S-breaks have been changed so that you can choose which of a character's S-craft will be used there. This is something that started in Daybreak 2 when Van learned his second S-craft, and I'm really not a fan of that. The whole point of S-breaks is that you're locked into whichever S-craft you've set as that character's break, and can only use that if you want to hijack the turn order. And if you wanted to use any other S-craft that character had, you had to wait for their turn to come up. On top of that, there are still legitimate use cases for Pummel after learning Barrage this time, which really isn't the case anywhere in the original games besides times when Pummel's gotten an upgrade and Barrage hasn't gotten it yet. So it takes away a lot of choice and skill expression when it comes to that. Also, this was the case in the original game, but Joshua being able to choose between a pure single target and hitting everyone on the field is a really big deal, and now you can just do that on the fly whenever you S-break with him, which, you know, he's already absurdly fast, and if you choose to stack CP restoring stuff on him instead of Agate, you could be doing a lot. Both Agate's Flame Smash and Dragoona Edge have had their AoEs increased in size, though Dragoona Edge is a lot less useful because it does arts damage now, so it's mostly just an AoE impede. And Final Break hits almost the entire battlefield when it was a relatively small area in the original game, which makes me wonder what they're going to do with Dragon Dive in the next game, because going from a medium area to hitting the entire battlefield is a very big change, when it won't really seem like that big of an upgrade in this case, especially since Final Break already has a pretty high 60% burn chance stapled to it now, so I'm not quite sure what additional effect they could even give Dragon Dive at this point. It also seems like they're bumping up the amount of crafts everyone has to at least 3 as Chloe joins with a brand new one. While Camphor and Sturm have both been given AoEs, it really seems like the developers wanted to push Chloe into a healer-based playstyle exclusively in this version when she was a perfectly fine arts-based attacker in the original game, as Sturm now does not impede at all, and instead has a chance to inflict freeze, and Lichtkreis has been significantly altered. It now, surprisingly enough, has shades of Grail Sphere thrown into it, as on top of fully healing and reviving the entire party, it gives them a 1000 HP shield. However, they do not get the defense bonus from 200 CP anymore. In fact, there's 0 benefit from using Chloe's S-craft at 200, which means they very much expect you to use her other crafts sometimes, all of which cost 50 CP, including the brand new craft, Vice Aura, which is 4 turns of HP regen and foresight and removing debuffs in a pretty big radius around Chloe. So, yeah. It seems like she's really expected to just spam healing abilities in this version. That being said, I did end up with her having a quartz layout that gave her Chaos Brand, and the 2 dogs that are the final boss of the chapter, like the ones Dalmor spawns to fight you, are really susceptible to confuse. I just ended up having Joshua spam Clock Up on her, and then having her repeatedly confuse the 2 of them so they kept hitting each other, because death throws in this version of the game on Nightmare is absurd. On my first attempt, I hard focused the dog that has less max HP and got it down while the other one was still at like 40 to 45%. It then immediately got all stats up and took like 5 turns in a row, eventually killing my entire party before I had a chance to act again through a Chloe S-craft. So yeah, Chaos Brand, pretty good. Saint is also really, really good in this version too. I won all 4 fights in the lighthouse basically by having Estelle alternate between spamming morale and then using Saint on Agate to keep his stats maxed out, then Joshua clock him up, Chloe keep everyone alive, while Agate just kind of murdered every single person and got half an S-craft back every time he used Final Break. Despite Nightmare actually being kind of difficult for the first time in a while, they did go a little easy on us in one regard, and that is that the Intelligence Division officers you fight on top of the lighthouse are not 2 of the same kind of enemy this time. There's one guy who works basically identically to how he did in the original game, and then one guy who's just a gunner who does some debuff stuff and impedes you sometimes. There aren't 2 guys spamming delay on your entire party in this version, which is probably the only reason I got through that fight in only a couple of attempts on Nightmare. I did learn very quickly that Chloe's Vice Aura is one of the most important crafts in this game, especially in this chapter, because you do have her for at least half of it, and basically every major enemy only has physical attacks during that entire period, so giving everyone Foresight turns out it's really good. My other strat was to give Joshua the Scent Quartz, which is currently known as Sweet Aroma, and I initially did that just for elemental coverage because it's now changed to be really, really good element-wise. It gives 3 points to each of the 4 lower elements, and then make sure he's perpetually in Foresight either with Vice Aura, or I also gave him the Emerald Shield Quartz, which gives him Foresight when his HP drops low. On top of the fact that Chloe and Estelle both get support abilities where if an enemy is downed near them, they will, instead of letting them die, revive them with 5% HP and also give them an additional 50 CP on top of what they already had, because when they die that way, their CP meter doesn't empty before they're revived. So if I also gave him morale, and honestly the physical defense buff is pretty worth spamming that in the first place, it will refund itself after a couple of Estelle's turns no matter what anyway. Yeah, getting a lot of Black Fangs on a Joshua who's already hard to hit, and then also almost permanently has Foresight, and has 2 get out of jail free revives that also get him halfway to another Black Fang, pretty useful as well. I think in this chapter things did finally start hitting the tipping point where I have enough resources that difficulty is starting to plateau, if not getting a bit easier, though easily the second hardest fight so far, only coming in behind the Capuas at the end of chapter 1, is the fight against the 6 Ravens members in the warehouse where Chloe first joined, surprisingly enough. There's 6 of them, they're really, really fast, you only have 3 party members, you aren't able to change Chloe's loadout at all, so she's stuck without accessories, and the healing craft the 3 leaders can use on the grunts is surprisingly potent. I think it can even make them recover from being stunned early, which is insane. Plus their buffing craft makes even the weaker guys surprisingly potent, and all 3 of them can enter their own version of Overdrive while also massively buffing their stats. Plus, they all have a craft that seems to be unable to miss, has a death blow chance, and even when they're not enraged, does almost as much damage as a party member has max HP anyway, which is up to like 1,000 plus party members max HP when they are enraged, so even Lichtkreis isn't really helping you in this situation unless you also have morale or some other defense buff up. Aerial does have its blind chance that it gets in later games, but only the grunts are particularly susceptible to it, and it's also pretty hard to get Arrow Storm, which has a higher blind chance, so really it did devolve into stacking Foresight on everyone and hoping they'd miss enough where I'd be able to focus down one of Rocco, Dean, and Race, and by that point the grunts were weak enough where it was just 2 of the other big guys left who are fairly manageable on their own. Other than that, most fights in the chapter were pretty smooth sailing. And while I guess you could argue that it's disappointing I only had to really think about a few boss fights a chapter on the maximum difficulty, it's still a lot more thinking than I did throughout my entire playthroughs of the first 2 Daybreak games, so I can't really say I have that much to complain about, especially because not only do all the old strats still work very well, but there are brand new strats that are just as good and equally as fun. Earthguard is AoE, but it is only a 1200 HP shield now, by the way, and while Earthwall does seem to work identically to how it did in the original, barring a slightly larger AoE, it does cost 240 EP now, so you're only really able to use maybe 5 of those endgame with the maximum amount of EP increasing stuff before you have to refill, so I'd say it's still been quite nerfed. Also, both Guard and Wall are significantly harder to achieve, as Guard needs 2 Earth and 2 Mirage, and Wall needs 4 Earth and 3 Space. This isn't super hard to get to, but especially early on in the game, you do have to choose between Guard and Wall, due to their secondary elements being different, And this is a lot harder to pull off than in the original game, period, where you could get Earthwall on any character with 2 open slots in the same line for the low price of 70 Earth Sepith starting in Chapter 2. I had Guard on both Estelle and Chloe for most of the chapter, and while I did use it a few times, it wasn't the dominant strategy, so I still think this is a marked improvement to general battles in a version of Trials in the Sky first chapter. Ever since the first trailer dropped, I've been pointing out how impressive it is that they're able to render almost an entire region of Liberl at a time, which is crazy for Falcom, where even the Daybreak games have areas split up into multiple screens sometimes. But Ruan takes it to a completely different level. From the top of the Sephiral/Azure Tower, you can see most of the Ruan region just straight up in one go. Now, a lot of areas are obscured by topography, but you can see from Varen Lighthouse over to Minoria Village. If you look past Minoria, you could see a little bit of a canyon where the bottom of the mountain trail is located. Then from Minoria, you can look all the way down the Seaside Way, past the orphanage, to the junction where the Forest Road to Genis Royal Academy splits off. Plus, you could see a very conspicuous line of trees leading directly from that junction all the way to where the Academy is, still in the same loading zone as all of this, just tucked behind a bunch of things. Then down to Ruan, then south down the Ina Causeway, not just to the fork in the road where you can branch off to go to the tower, but you can see a little bit of the path that instead goes to Airleton, and I'm pretty sure I can even see a little bit of mist coming from the waterfall if you look directly towards where it is. I don't want to directly use the X word to describe what I'm seeing here, because the style of exploration and way the levels are designed between the two series is vastly different. And even here, the entire region of Ruan is just a bunch of straight linear paths that don't have a lot of wide open space, but the amount of things you can see from here and have on the same loading zone and be able to fast travel to almost instantly is really impressive, and the kind of thing I haven't really seen in this genre outside of the Xenoblade series. So yeah, you might be able to tell, I'm still really loving my playthrough of this game so far, and I am very excited for Chapter 3 and beyond. There are a lot of scenes I want to see how they do. I want to see if they made any changes to Tita and Zin to make them more viable in this game, and I'm just curious to see if there's any new side content, or however any other tweaks to the story might go. My one real concern right now is that there's not going to be a shop to be able to buy monster ingredients at any point for the rest of the story, because a lot of recipes I haven't made need them, and I believe to get full achievement completion, you do also need to make the peculiar recipes, the quote-unquote bad versions of everything as well. And I don't know if it's going to be possible to grind every single type of drop out in the Gransel region alone after I'd have learned all the recipes, so hopefully there is a shop to rectify things. My biggest actual complaint of the chapter is kind of a funny one, because I already compliment sandwiched it way earlier in this very video. Yeah, I have a couple localization nitpicks still. Yeah, I have a few quandaries about the gameplay, but those are largely irrelevant concerns because, well, they don't make the gameplay any worse than it was in the original, so whatever. But I gotta say, I think the play is way too long in this version, and they probably should have cut out some of the lines that were present in the original. In that version, you are still advancing text boxes at your own speed, but in this, the entire play is done in the middling type of cutscene, where dialogue auto-advances instead of you being able to press a button at the end of a text box. So it is basically just an uninterrupted MP4 playing for what's gotta be at least 20 minutes, probably closer to half an hour if you count all the cutscenes before and after that. And while the voice acting itself is good, and the animation is pretty good where it needs to actually be animated beyond just characters talking to each other, that is a lot for something that, as I've already mentioned, doesn't have any direct relevance to any events of the series, now or in later arcs so far. Yeah, I get it, it's the namesake of the chapter, and yeah, I get it, adding voice acting means every cutscene in this version is going to be longer than in the original, but I don't really know. There aren't really any other times in the entire Trails series where that long a block of cutscenes is used for anything other than major story beats. And well, yes, the point of Skyforest chapter is slow character building and getting introduced to the country of Liberl. There's not a whole lot of relevant character moments during the entire play until you get to the very end where Estelle thinks Chloe and Joshua actually kissed. That's the important part, and that only takes up like a minute of the entire performance. I think Jill as the narrator is good, and you should at least keep that part, as well as some snippets of most of the scenes in the play that are already there. But I just recently watched the Golden Sun Silver Moon performance from Trails from Zero, and I think the way that game handled it was a lot better, where large blocks of the story are just told in text crawls over some pieces of action taking place in the cutscene background behind it. That would have very much sped up this entire sequence, which is honestly the only time I've remotely started checking out from a cutscene in this game, which is impressive because, well, I know the entire story already. But of course, that being said, it's not exactly a major concern, and there's nothing like this for the rest of the game or even the arc in general, so it's not going to become a recurring thing, and I am just excited to move on to Zeiss, see Tita, and look at Zin and think it's really funny that he looks older than his Daybreak design in every single other appearance, including this remake of a game where he's significantly younger that came out after Daybreak. Till I'm done with that chapter and can report on that though, this is Luxon, signing off.